Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athlete trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this week's episode, we have a CEU episode that I hope is going to be like a new kind of style of CEU episodes, and it's going to be kind of focused on like rehab concepts.
Oh, I like that idea.
Yes. In particular, this one's going to be focusing on kind of like kettlebells and like kettlebell training.
All right. So what are we going to talk about?
Yeah, so we're going to discuss the history of kettlebell training within athletics. And then we're going to discuss the biomechanical principles of just some various kettlebell exercises. And then we're going to examine the evidence of kettlebell training within rehab and athletic performance.
Awesome. So if you guys are interested in the CEU, it is available for free if you're listening to this as it comes out through Clinically Pressed and Athletic Training Chat. Big thank you to them. Make sure you scroll down to the show notes to find the quiz and course evaluation, enroll in the course, and get your certificate. So if you're interested in that, it is available to you. Why don't we get started with the anatomy of a kettlebell?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the history of kettlebell training. First, what exactly is a kettlebell? I feel like it's kind of become pretty mainstream now.
The anatomy of a kettlebell.
Yeah, literally. It's a round-shaped cast iron or steel weight, which nowadays it could almost be made of it. Anything could kind of be kind of like a kettlebell. I don't think it has to be steel or cast iron, but that's kind of traditionally what they've been.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of has a handle on top. So it almost resembles like a cannonball with a handle. Right? That's exactly what a kettlebell is. It originated from the Soviet Union, so it's kind of like a Russian style of exercise, which, I mean, Soviet Union lifters, they were jacked. Maybe taking steroids, but just saying, they were jacked. They know something or two about lifting. But there are many different styles of kind of kettlebell training, right? There's what's termed kind of sport. There's kind of like the stuff you kind of see in CrossFit. Like CrossFit does kind of implement some kettlebell exercises, but I think the important thing is that's not necessarily true kettlebell training. It's kind of just using exercises with kettlebells.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And that's the one thing too, like this episode's more kind of like actual styles of kettlebell training. Any exercise can incorporate a kettlebell. We're actually going to be talking about the exercises that are specific to the philosophy of kettlebell training. I think what most people are familiar with without them knowing they're familiar with it is what's termed kind of hard style. This is like your kettlebell swing, your kettlebell snatch, kettlebell clean, kettlebell press, squat, and then everyone's favorite, the Turkish get-up.
That is my favorite.
Yeah, if you're a corrective exercise person, Turkish get-up is your go-to.
I feel like Turkish get-up is just so beneficial.
For everything.
Yeah, shoulder stability.
Yeah. And then
you can incorporate it in so many different ways. You could even just do like a partial Turkish get-up.
Yeah. Also, yeah, you could break down each movement into different segments, depending on what you're trying to work on. Also, it's great for the lifespan. All right, it's great for athletes, but it's also great for teaching people, hey, if you fall, you got to be able to get up or catch yourself. Yeah. It's great for the lifespan.
I've never heard of hard style before, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's just kind of like the school thought behind it. That's just what those exercises are termed within the actual kettlebell training. And I think most people are kind of familiar with the swing and the get up. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a lot of the literature is mostly focused on the swing. Right? Mostly just the kettlebell swing. There's some stuff on the snatch and the clean, but it's all kind of like the motions are the same to your kind of normal snatch, except for this was just a single arm. You're not really necessarily doing both.
Right. That's how I broke my Apple Watch screen.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Oops.
Yeah, that's true. Oops. So, as we just start talking about like kettlebell training, the reason that there's kind of like a technicality is because it's not just like you're just normal, like, okay, do your classic 3 sets of 10. They do have kind of set parameters. Everything I've kind of seen in the literature does say there's about 3 to 5 sets of like 20 swings or 20 reps of the actual exercise with 20 seconds rest in between over a 2-minute-ish interval, right? So it's a very kind of fast-paced workout that's still also emphasizing not max strength, but kind of like that strength endurance kind of component.
Well, I was going to say sets of 20. That's like...
You're moving.
Right.
And
well, no, like that's a lot.
That is a lot.
Like more than your typical strength. What is it? Strength like 8 to 12 parameters?
Yeah. Well, that could be hypertrophy. If you're going max strength, you would go less because your load is so much higher.
Right.
So it could be 1 to 5. So yeah. So this is more going towards that kind of endurance side.
Especially swing is actually really interesting that they did a lot of research on that, because I feel like I'm trying to picture. I cannot picture when I would use a swing in my rehab.
Ooh, we'll talk about it.
I'm intrigued.
Yes. As far as the weight goes, you want a weight that is going to be challenging. And this is going to be kind of different per, obviously, individualized per patient athlete. But in general, it seemed like most articles that kind of looked at male, female, females kind of started with 8 kilograms, which is about 17 pounds. Obviously, you can go higher, right, depending on the athlete and what they can tolerate. And males tended to start around like 12 kilograms, which is about 26 and a half pounds. Those are just kind of starting points again, right? That's kind of a good place to start. Obviously, you can go, like if I have a male athlete like who can't tolerate swinging 26 and a half pounds with good form, then, right, back them down a little bit, right? And vice versa, right? If it's too easy, you can go up. You don't have to necessarily start there.
Right.
I think the important thing to note with this episode is there are certifications in kettlebell training, right? So there are actual courses to learn the full kind of philosophy of the style. This is more to give you that introduction to start thinking about it into your rehab and how you can incorporate some of these exercises into kind of what you do with your rehab, or even kind of like that late stage rehab, like return to sports stuff, because this is pretty dynamic stuff. So it's definitely kind of something that is very beneficial later. So as you know, as we start talking about that kind of rehab aspect of it, is we need to understand, what does it do, right? What groups is this working on? Why do I even want to do it in my rehab? Right, and for the kettlebell swing, this is definitely what you probably picture. So the kettlebell swing is basically you kind of hinge with the kettlebell in between your legs and you swing up to about shoulder height. You can also go overhead too with the kettlebell swing. And then you let the weight kind of come back down in between your legs. All right, so if you look at the kind of the motion of it, it's a very hip hinge dominant exercise. Right, that's the whole point. It kind of looks like a deadlift, but more dynamic. Right, so just based on that, you already can tell it's going to activate the posterior chain very effectively.
Right.
And it does have high activation levels of the posterior chain muscles. Like glute max has a 75% MVIC, which is max voluntary isometric contraction. Biceps femoris has 78, and glute med has 55%. Kind of to give meaning to these percentages. Anything over about 50% kind of max MVIC is thought to be enough activation to promote strength gains. So anything you see over 50, you're like, oh, we're strengthening things, right? So that's kind of what your target is when you're choosing exercises for certain muscle groups.
It didn't talk about the abdominals?
There are some, and the ones that really talked about the abdominals were really geared towards the variation of, instead of doing a two-handed or two-armed kettlebell swing, doing just one arm. And that's really where you'll start to see the more core activation with it.
I assume more like oblique.
Yeah, you'll see like kind of contralateral oblique. You'll get some ipsilateral rectus abdominis if you're really kind of splitting hairs between the two. So really how I kind of just simplify it is, if you're looking to really kind of challenge that kind of rotary stability of the core, the single arm is going to be kind of your best bet, because you will start to challenge that core in a different fashion.
I feel like that when I picture that, I think it'd be really good for baseball or softball.
Yes, 100%. Any really, yeah, any of your overhead sports, because of the shoulder aspect too. Because even though like the shoulder studies that I looked at kind of looked at like the Turkish getup, of course, and then they kind of did the snatch and like stuff like that. Not a ton went into like the arms kettlebell swing itself, but for sure, anytime you're getting weight and you're throwing overhead, right, there is going to be a stability component. All right, for sure. As far as our posterior core muscle, right, the erector spinae, right? The effects, it kind of depends. In essence, it might be fairly minimal. Some studies that I've seen shows it could activate the erector spinae up to 60%. But really, it's not that much better than just doing erector-focused exercises.
I guess it also depends on if you're cueing correctly.
For sure.
Or if they're executing it correctly.
For sure. It's like the deadlift.
Right.
There's some people who just feel it in their back more.
Right.
You know, so that could be their just motor pattern.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. But yeah, so that's kind of the kettlebell swing. Like I said, it's a really classic example of kind of what most people think of like using a kettlebell and like kettlebell specific exercises. And it's really good for the posterior chain, especially like that late stage rehab. And we'll kind of talk about the effects of it clinically a little bit later.
Okay.
As far as the Turkish get up, of course, this is as with kettlebell training itself, it's a full body exercise, which again is the nice thing about the idea behind kettlebell exercises. It's not just one thing. It's a full body exercise, which is going to promote a lot more adaptation than just kind of focusing on one muscle group.
Right.
All right. So in phases where the arm is supporting the body, the shoulder, like the demands on the shoulder are higher, right?
The demands on the kettlebell holding shoulder. Right?
No, the shoulder that's supporting the body.
Oh, okay.
All right. So when you're on that phase of elbow on the ground
Uh-huh.
and even transitioning up to hand on the ground,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot larger demand on the shoulder there compared to the one that's holding the weight.
Interesting.
And a lot of it is the larger muscles, like the lats kick in a little bit more, upper trapezius kicks in more. I would argue the rotator cuff probably still has a large role in that. The study that I was looking at, the infraspinatus didn't have a lot of EMG activity, but I believe posterior delt did. And anytime you talk about like EMG measurements, you always have to worry about crosstalk between other muscles because all it is a sensor on the skin, right? It could be picking up a signal from anywhere. So I still
they're
think
doing surface EMG. They're not doing needle.
No, it was surface EMG. So I think that's a limitation, and I do think like there's a ton of previous other studies that show weight bearing is really good for the rotator cuff. So I would still assume the overall rotator cuff is firing, even though infraspinatus maybe not.
And guess what? It's not going to be the only exercise that you're doing. So if you're really worried about that, you can stick another shoulder stability exercise in there or another rotator cuff.
For sure. And on the flip side, when you take out the weight bearing support of the upper extremity, the extremity with the weight does see a higher rotator cuff activation. So infraspinatus is higher on the one that's holding the weight, which is what we would expect and why we would probably want to do this exercise in the first place. So again, really good exercise for really just, we haven't even talked about how it's good for the lower extremity, right? Because there is a hip extension aspect to it. There's a press, right? Leg press to actually stand up, right? And the squat to lower yourself back down, right? Overall, great exercise. So those are the biomechanics behind it. What does that mean for actual clinical practice?
I was thinking about this while you were talking about it, and I feel like you're saying also like late phase rehab, right? And I feel like this is also where it comes into play, like the difference between rehab and training.
Yes.
And this is kind of like in that cross, like
Yeah.
building strength, kind of more training than it is traditional rehab.
Yes. And also too, I'm glad you brought that up. The advantage to the kettlebell and why it became really popular over the past decade and a little bit longer than that is because of the aspect of it doesn't require as much equipment or space, right? Traditional,
just a cannonball on a stick.
Yeah, on a handle. Right? And you just need enough space to be able to swing, right? And get up and down from the ground and stuff like that, right? So it doesn't take a lot of space like traditional weights would, right? Like,
I don't know. I'd be kind of scared to have my athletes do a swing in the ATR.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd do it in the room. Maybe we're going outside. But like when you think about it, like we have like weight rooms have these squat racks and you have the barbell and then you have the racks for the weights, right? It's very equipment intensive. It could be costly, space very filling, right? you're going to need a big space for all that stuff. Whereas this, you really just need just progressing weights of kettlebells.
Right.
And you can get a full body exercise out of it. So
they don't take up that much space, except in our ATR, they sit on the floor and we trip on them all the time.
that's the problem. They sit on the floor.
Right.
Which mine did for a long time, but I found myself a shelf. And I now have my kettlebells in a shelf.
That's nice.
It's nice. We need to do another video of my athletic training room to show the growth.
We do.
And the more duckies, or as Instagram like to say, duckies.
Duckies.
I got more duckies. But yeah, that was actually a big advantage to the kettlebells. And when you brought that up, it made me think about, well, that's kind of perfect for us because we run into this problem a lot where I can only stress them so much in the athletic training room. At a certain point, all the things that I have can't stress them anymore.
And that's when I set them to our strength and conditioning coach.
That's when you need the strength coach, right? Or the weight room, right? And if you have one, that's great. That's a great tool to utilize, and that's super beneficial, right? But in those places where, hey, maybe you don't have one, or you don't have one consistently,
right?
Or just something to kind of work into whatever their programming is, this could be a great way to still further challenge without having a giant weight room and all these weights and maxing out.
Right.
Yeah. So clinically, there's not a ton of it feels like this was really popular in 2014, 2015, and then now it's I could barely find anything on the actual application of kettlebell training.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. But there are a few interesting aspects to it that do show some benefit. Right, one is a case study, and again, I know it's just a case study
case studies are important too.
Yes,
they drive larger rehab research.
Exactly. On an elite women's soccer athlete that was post-op ACL. She had some neuromuscular dysfunction to where she had higher activation of her vastus lateralis compared to her medial hamstring group, right? Which this group has kind of identified as that's a big risk factor for injury because the medial hamstring group can play a large role in supporting the rotary stability of the knee, especially the job of the ACL.
Sorry, can you say that again? She had
higher activation of the vastus lateralis compared to her medial hamstring group.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, again, not many of us have the capabilities of testing that, but good to know.
Surface EMG?
Surface EMG. That's why they grouped it into medial hamstrings.
But they could take out the vastus lateralis?
That one's a little bit easier because it is pretty, quads are pretty noticeably split. You can identify that easier than,
but not semimembranosus tendinosus.
Exactly. You're getting a lot of crosstalk, so it's just easier to just
group.
Yep. And what they did is they basically took this athlete who was post-op through 6 weeks of just straight kettlebell training, and really it was mostly focused. It wasn't even transitioning the exercises we're doing snatch today or we're doing clean. It was literally kettlebell swing, and they just changed the parameters from there, and it actually improved the activation of the medial hamstring group compared to the vastus lateralis. So it actually helped correct the neuromuscular dysfunction.
That's really cool.
Which does make some sense because you do see the higher posterior chain activation with the swing. And not saying that the quads aren't involved, right? But if you're truly doing it well with the actual hip hinge, the quad activation should be pretty minimal.
Yeah, right. It's more stability at that point.
Yes.
It's not really a mover.
It shouldn't be. And if anything, it's minimal. Because again, you should be mostly hip hinging, not necessarily bending the knees too much. You can also see improved postural control. And this is especially as we talk about the single arm swings, right? Because you're challenging the rotary stability of the core a lot more, right? So it's actually been shown to help with that kind of postural control and actually have the fine motor skills to, if you're being perturbed, right? If your torso is being pushed, right? You have the proper activation to turn off certain muscles and turn on the right ones a lot quicker after doing kettlebell exercises compared to not, which is very important to postural control. One thing that I did find that was interesting was the kettlebell swing actually creates a posterior shear force against the lumbar discs instead of an anterior shear force. So if you're thinking about disc herniation, right? Anterior shear force is a big problem. That's not good because that's what kind of helps create that nucleus
Bulging.
pulposus pushing posterior. So this is actually going on the flip side and creating that posterior shear force. Now, if you have a spondy, that's bad.
Right.
Posterior shear is bad.
Right.
But for disc, which is very common, this could be a beneficial late stage exercise, I'd say. I probably wouldn't do this early on with someone who has especially a fairly symptomatic disc. But you could feel confident to do this exercise later. The next is, I think, what most people kind of think of this exercise as is kind of being like a power exercise because the weight's not super heavy and you do have to kind of move fast with it and produce a lot of force to get the weight up and catch it and bring it back up. And honestly, the power aspect is, it might help a little bit, but it seems to be pretty minimal. Right? Some studies show that, hey, maybe it does improve jump performance, but the stats that were run showed that it really wasn't significant. So you can't necessarily say like, oh, did it truly help? Maybe not. But again, for an individual athlete that might see an improved jump performance, that may be beneficial, right? Even though statistically it shouldn't have been.
I'm amazed that you were able to read all these things and remember all of this.
Heck yeah, I was fascinated by this. All right, so it might have a power component. Now, if your goal is, hey, I'm training power, there's probably better exercises, but this could have an effect on power if that's kind of like a secondary goal or something you're not necessarily focusing with or wanting to change up the late stage rehab.
I feel like it seems from an outside perspective like a power exercise, but
Yes.
like when you actually do it, I feel like it doesn't feel like power. Like it
That's fair.
It feels more like strength. And also, this is also just reminding me like, and this could be for your industrial athletes, I guess.
Yes.
Very sport specific, activity specific
Yeah.
for them, I guess, because all of this is just reminding me of when in our backyard we had this brick wall that was just kind of random and just in the middle of our yard. So we sledgehammered it down.
Yeah.
And this is literally like, it was like a one-handed kettlebell swing over and over and over to get these bricks like down one by one.
Yeah.
And that was so much posterior chain and repetition and it was a lot of hip hinge.
Yes.
And it like exactly what we're talking about here. So like I'm just picturing like industrial athlete construction, like very activity specific.
And it's funny that you brought up industrial athlete. Like some of the studies referenced work that looked at like a non-athletic population, so like just workers, and it improved like those ergonomics and the worker satisfaction and like cardiovascular stuff. So yeah, definitely. And again, and like you said, I feel this is really geared towards like strength endurance, right? Like you're getting the aspect of strength, but you're also getting like high reps very quickly. It could be very fatiguing. Like really trying to maintain that as opposed to really leaning towards one or the other, like a power or just a strength or just an endurance. I think it really kind of blends that strength endurance aspect together. As far as the strength goes, again, you see small strength gains, which is what you would see with most strength endurance kind of stuff. You're not going to see huge strength gains, but you do see small strength gains. Now, compared to other lifting techniques, right, this is going to probably be pretty minimal. Right. So if your true goal is like, hey, I just want to build strength, right, there are going to be better programming aspects than this. But this could be, again, a nice change of pace or a different phase of that kind of goal that you're working out of.
Right. Like stability with movement.
Yes.
Which is also what so much of Pilates is.
Yeah, for sure.
But this is actually like a lot more resistance training than like Pilates would be.
Yes.
So that's a.
Oh, yeah, and plus it has a weight. You got to have a weight.
No, you don't always have to have a weight.
Just say it. When you think of strength, right? The meatheads, the gym rats think of weights.
They've never tried Pilates.
No, it's hard. They don't know because it doesn't involve weight. So they're like, no.
So non-hard style type kettlebell, fun extra bonus content.
Yes.
I like to use kettlebells for like anytime that I'm trying to use like stability, like what are they called? Kettlebell suitcases? No, I'm gonna
like suitcase carry.
Make up all names of this. So this is practice-based evidence over here. Yeah, the suitcase carry where you can put the kettlebell upside down and hold.
That one's the a bottoms up carry.
What do you mean it's a bottoms up?
Because suitcase carry would be more like holding a suitcase down.
Oh wow, I've been calling them the wrong thing the entire time. I've been calling
that one is a bottoms up because the bottom should be facing up.
See, this is why it's practice-based evidence.
Which is another challenge because the bottom facing up, it wants to fall a certain way, so you have to hold
That's exactly why I like it so much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's a really good one. That one, anything Turkish get up, even like laying on your side and doing external rotation with your top shoulder with the kettlebell, because I'll do that with the dumbbell as well, because you're using gravity instead of like double external rotation holding a TheraBand. You're pulling resistance like with the band, but like really you're not really utilizing gravity to your advantage, so really getting them side lying with that affected shoulder toward the ceiling and then holding either a TheraBand. You could start with a TheraBand, or you could do it with a dumbbell, or you could do it with a kettlebell. I like adding that kettlebell in just to get a little bit more of that stability aspect where you're getting a little bit more of that movement. What are some other kettlebell ones I like? Oh, anything that you're passing the kettlebell back and forth between hands.
Oh, yeah.
Like a squat, or like we do one where you have your one leg forward, like a split squat or like a lunge. Mm-hmm. You could do it just like that, or you could do like toe on the RX pad. Yeah. In that split squat, and you're just passing the kettlebell back and forth underneath your front leg.
Ooh, that's a cool one. Yeah, I do a lot of kettlebell stuff. I use the kettlebells a lot because those are my heavier weights, because like the dumbbells in the clinic go up to 10. Right. Oh, so my kettlebells, I have 15 to 20. Mm-hmm. So once I'm ready to start adding more weight to whatever exercise, a lot of times I have to use the kettlebell for that. I like goblet squats with the kettlebell.
That's a good one.
I do that one a lot. I want to start incorporating the swings and stuff, but again, I need more late stage rehab people.
You have a glass door.
We do it in the hallway.
You still have a glass door in the hallway.
Yeah, but further. It's a little bit harder to damage that. I do have a glass door. Also too. Sorry, I don't want to sound like too CrossFit-y here, but one of the studies talked about these things called like Indian clubs. Like it almost looks like a bowling pin, but a lot thinner. And the weight's pretty minimal. I can't remember how much it was. Mm-hmm. And like you could use that for like shoulder, and like the way they were describing the exercises, I was like, whoa, that's like really functional. Like that would actually be kind of cool.
I have to look that up.
Yeah, look it up. It's pretty dope. So now I'm like, I want some.
That's not kettlebell.
I know, but they compared it to a kettlebell. So it was what I was reading.
Got it.
Yeah. I can't remember the results between the two. I mean, the kettlebell was more because the weight was a little bit more, but still.
So wait, tell me what a suitcase carry is, because apparently I've been getting them confused.
Just holding the weight down, like if you were to hold a suitcase.
And just walk?
And just walk.
Oh. You know what? I do use the kettlebell like that, but instead of walking, I do it for upper trap. So I'll have them like lateral flexion of the neck.
Nice.
Away from the side.
Nice.
And then I'll do like shoulder to ear towards the same side.
That's cool.
With the kettlebell.
Nice.
Or even just shoulder shrugs, one-sided shoulder shrugs.
Nice.
I feel like we're going to stop recording and then I'm going to think of a million other kettlebell exercises.
Yep. Yeah, it does give a lot of versatility. Again, it is pretty functional than just kind of like dumbbells or like a barbell. Something different.
Yeah, definitely something different. What is your action item?
I think kettlebells are a nice change of pace if you're trying to challenge your student athletes a little bit different. Again, if your goal is really focused towards strength endurance, I think this is a great set of exercises to do. Same thing with like the snatch and the actual clean, the kettlebell clean, kettlebell snatch, right? That's a great shoulder stability. And especially for someone that like, you probably don't really trust doing a snatch, right? This may be a good way to actually learn how to do the snatch, right? Actually learn the mechanics of it in a less dangerous environment compared to a heavy barbell over your head. Right, so this could be a good start. Right, so kind of like really
or even return back to that.
Yeah, right. So really kind of define your goal, and you could tailor these exercises to what you want your goal, or to what your goal is.
Sweet.
Yeah.
How many references did you use for this one?
We used about 12. Yeah, about 12 to 14.
Those will be on our website if you're interested, again, in the show notes, where you will also find the course evaluation, course quiz, all of that listed down below in the link to the course that you can register for. Thank you so much to Clinically Pressed. Please let us know your favorite kettlebell exercises in our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/AT Corner Podcast. There's only one question to get in. Where did you hear about our podcast? It will automatically let you in, and it will be the question of the week this week. So if you're interested in some other kettlebell exercises, hop on that link, and I'm sure some other people will comment, and you can see what other people are doing in their practice. So I think that's it for the main episode. If you guys are new, we do every episode as either education stories or interviews. Education episodes are just like this one, where Randy does a deep dive into our literature, and we kind of compare it and just have a nice conversation, and they're eligible for CEUs. Our story episodes are from real life athletic trainers all around the world, which is super exciting to say, and we bring stories on different topics and chat about those and how to handle things and what we've seen and what we haven't seen. And then we bring on people for spotlight interviews about so many different things. So make sure you tune in. And if you ever want to hear anything on the podcast, let us know on Instagram at AT Corner Podcast. And I think that's it.
Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.